MSW Media.
Multiple FBI agents filed a lawsuit against the Department of Justice to stop them from compiling and releasing lists of agents who worked on January 6th cases.
Trump's nominee to lead the FBI, Kash Patel, took a $25,000 payment from a Kremlin-connected filmmaker for his work on an anti-Western documentary that aired on Tucker Carlson's online network.
The newly minted Attorney General Pam Bondi issued a flurry of memos this week, including one that disbands the Foreign Influence Task Force, greatly limiting criminal prosecution and focusing instead on civil enforcement.
And an unlikely hero emerges as acting director of the FBI, Brian Driscoll, the Drizz, pushes back against the Trump administration. All of this and more on today's episode of Unjustified. Hey, everybody, I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Andy McCabe.
Oh, we have a lot to discuss today. I'm not even sure we're going to be able to get through all of it, but we're going to try to get to some listener questions at the end. But this is Unjustified. The episode airs Sunday, February 9th. Little sorry to our patrons. I was out of the country, so we had to record this on Saturday. So
let's clarify that a little bit. You were out of the country voluntarily.
Yes.
You were not pursued out of the country.
Correct. I am now returning to the country.
Very good.
So it's probably going to be pretty late Saturday night when you get this. So I do apologize because I know that that's one of the perks that you signed up for. But I did have a much needed margarita or two, and I didn't want to, record under the influence.
Nice. A good decision under any circumstance, but also good decision taking a little bit of a break because you certainly deserved it. I'm sure nobody's going to begrudge you that.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. If you do have questions you want to submit to us, there's a link in the show notes. You can send in any questions that you have for me or Andy. Now, let's talk a little bit before we get into some of the more wonky parts of the news this week. I want to talk about Brian Driscoll. He's emerged as kind of an unlikely hero here. First of all, he's not even supposed to be the acting director, right?
That's right.
Trump messed him up on the website and put a guy named Kassane, who was supposed to be the director, put him as the deputy director and put Driscoll as the director. And they just kind of looked at each other and shrugged and said, well, I guess we'll just switch offices. And so,
yeah, it's just classic FBI. I mean, you're getting like a insider's view as to how we stumble forward sometimes despite ourselves. But yeah, so Kassane is maybe a little more well known, was the SAC of the Counterterrorism Division in the New York field office, and had been an SAC for a little while. Driscoll had literally become an SAC 5 days before they made him inadvertently acting director. He was running the hostage rescue team, which is, of course, the team of special operators that lives down at Quantico and deploys to do things like, get the boy out of the bunker or travel overseas and work with our special forces colleagues to do the work we do on the counterterrorism fronts around the globe. And so he had been promoted to the SAC of the Newark field office for I think 5 days before he got the nod to be acting deputy director. And then, of course, the White House messed up the paperwork and the public announcement reversed the names by accident. And then they were just like, oh, well, who cares anyway? It doesn't matter. They let it be.
Yeah. And we also have another guy over at the New York field office named, I believe, Dennehy. Who was kind of putting the message out like, everybody dig in. And so there was a seemingly a little bit of resistance from what's happening in the Trump administration there. And a lot of this started with the fact that, we talked about this last week, Donald Trump, we saw it kind of happening in real time, wanted the names of all of the FBI agents that worked on his cases. And then that got expanded in an email actually sent out by Driscoll to all FBI agents that he's been asked to compile a list of all agents that worked on any January 6th case across the country. And we're talking thousands of potential agents who did that. And so according to some, inter-office chats among agents, somebody witnessed Driscoll when a Department of Justice person and a White House proxy showed up to get that list of names or ask for it. And apparently Driscoll pushed back pretty vociferously and actually told, according to some agents who may or may not have witnessed the interaction, told them to fuck off. So that was an interesting a bit of message that got out. The Washington Post reported on it. NBC picked it up. Not sure about that, but what is clear is that he's pushing back on this, because when he did supply that list of names, and he did send an email out saying, hey, I was told I had to do this. I've provided the names. But he actually told everyone in this email, hey, I didn't give the names. I gave what's called a unique employee ID. So, Andy, what was in that email he sent out to his colleagues, and what's a unique employee identification number?
Sure. So that's just a number assigned to every employee. So every employee has an employee file, right? That's uploaded into the FBI system, just like it would be at any large organization. And each file has an identifying number. I would expect those are the numbers that we're talking about here. It's also possible that they just assigned a random number to the names on the list and then held back the actual identities and have like essentially a key where you could decode any individual number associated to the actual ID after the fact as needed. That's my guess, or they maybe use the employee personnel file numbers. But either way, they didn't provide the name. So Driscoll's
making it hard for him, making it really difficult
right.
for them to figure out who these agents are.
That's right. Yeah. So let's talk about the email first. So this is what Driscoll said in his email. He said, consistent with my commitment to be transparent with you, I write this afternoon to provide you with another update on our engagement with the Department of Justice regarding the department's memo dated January 31st, 2025. That memo directed the FBI to provide lists by noon today of, quote, all current and former FBI personnel assigned at any time to investigations and or prosecutions relating to, 1, events that occurred at or near the United States Capitol on January 6, 2021, and 2, United States versus Hania. Now, sidebar, note that the DOJ demand was FBI personnel. So this is a list that's not exclusive to FBI agents. It could also include FBI analysts or specialists who do kind of specialized kind of functions in the Bureau. Like we have people who help us analyze data that we seize from search warrants, or
right. That was going to be my question. So if
cyber
somebody
specialists,
said,
things
crack
like
this
that.
phone or find out where this phone was on this day, and the guy's just sitting in his office like, okay, and he just gives that information.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you executed a search warrant at a January 6th defendant's home, you could just get pulled into that. You might be a violent crimes agent, had nothing to do with any of this stuff, but they needed an extra body on that search warrant, so you went out. Or maybe you're a CART examiner, which is like these cyber trained folks who go out and help us do things like download computers during a search warrant. So we don't have to actually take the computer. We just take a mirror image of it. So people who literally were involved in these cases simply because they were asked, maybe had no knowledge of it or no role in the investigation other than that. Okay. So the email goes on to say, I understand that our response continues to be a cause for concern and confusion among the thousands of employees on the lists and thousands more concerned for the well-being of our FBI family. We have sent our response to the Department of Justice as required, and I want to explain what we have provided. We are extremely sensitive to protecting the personal safety and security of our personnel. Therefore, the data we provided identified employees only by unique employee identifier, their current title, their title at the time of the relevant investigation or prosecution, the office to which they are currently assigned, their role in the relevant investigation or prosecution, and the date of last activity related to the investigation or prosecution. We also made clear in our letter that consistent with our oath as FBI employees to uphold the U.S. Constitution and federal law, we are assigned to matters purely based on the responsibilities of our jobs. Case assignments have never reflected a choice on behalf of any individual. Our personnel are directed to work on specific matters and, in fact, can be charged with misconduct for failure to do work to which they are assigned. I want to be clear again, as I have stated consistently, that the FBI does not consider anyone's identification on one of these lists as an indicator of misconduct. The lists simply reflect that an FBI employee was assigned to an appropriately authorized and predicated matter at a moment in time. I want to thank you for your continued commitment to our mission, to our partners, and to each other. Day after day, you are out there protecting the American people and upholding the Constitution. We remain in your debt.
Yeah, so I think that's really important that he drove home the point that you were making earlier, that, these FBI assigned agents or analysts or specialists are just pulled in and said, do this thing, or testify here that you did this thing, right? Because we saw a lot of folks, when you get the data from the phone, you have to come in and have an expert testify in court from the FBI that this is how they got this data. This is what it means. This is why it's verifiable, et cetera. So anybody like that, you're pulled in and told. And I think it's interesting that he's like, nobody does this just voluntarily. And you can actually get in a lot of trouble if you don't do what we ask you to do.
That's right. You learned day one in Quantico. We all serve the needs of the Bureau. The needs of the Bureau. You will hear that phrase, the needs of the Bureau, reiterated 10,000 times during the course of your career. Because it's like saying, hey, tough shit. You do what the Bureau needs you to do, not what you want to do. So the other thing that I would think is important to point out here, I absolutely, totally approve and applaud what Brian Driscoll did here. Mad respect for this guy. He stepped up, put himself in considerable danger or risk of getting fired, and tried to push back in whatever way he could. At the end of the day, though, DOJ is asking for some employee information. They're going to get that. It is not on its face illegal or improper for them to ask for employee information. We provide employee information to the DOJ all the time, maybe for something like awards, a list of people who worked on a case that are up for the AG awards, or to the IG who is investigating specific allegations of misconduct. So what Driscoll is doing here is totally appropriate for standing up for his people and trying to protect them by not immediately identifying them. But he's also playing for time. He knows that eventually he's going to have to do what they're asking him to do. But I see this as kind of a strategic move to kind of delay the harm that might come from what DOJ would do with this information. That's where the bad part comes in. Not the request for it, but what they are likely going to do with it. And he's trying to hold that off in an effort to give people a little time to organize, maybe think about getting together around lawsuits, injunctions, things like that. So I think it was a great move, but I think people who hoped like this would be the end of it were probably a little bit disappointed, but Driscoll did the right thing here.
No, yeah, I agree. It kind of reminds me of that CIA sabotage manual from World War II that's been going around. Like, create subcommittees, always use channels, slow the work down. Try, if I keep saying in my head, autocrat meet bureaucrat. This is what we do here. Yeah, here's a list. It's all numbers. Good luck.
Good luck. There's no punctuation, so good luck reading it.
It was kind of like when they knew the FBI was doing the background check on Kavanaugh, and they knew that that nothing that they found was going to get past the White House because it was an expanded background check, and the White House was the client. That they're like, all right, we'll open up a tip line, and then they just dumped like 4,500 tips on the White House's front steps, and we're like, there you go, buddy.
Yeah,
because they were ordered not to, investigate those further, and they have to follow those orders. But then the incredible thing happened here. I think the acting Deputy Attorney General, acting Assistant Attorney General Emil Bove. I can't remember what position he's in right now, but
he's acting Deputy Attorney General. The DAG Deputy Attorney General, is well known as the second most powerful person in the Department of Justice, after the AG.
He's the Rod Rosenstein of this novel.
Exactly.
So Emil Bove, by the way, Trump's personal lawyer, actually was very angry about this list of numbers instead of names. And, the FBI's major concern is that these names will be published and put out to everyone in America, and that would put these agents and analysts and FBI employees in danger, because that's what Trump does. So then Bove, I guess, told Driscoll to send out an email. He wanted Driscoll to send this email out to all of the FBI. And it says, Driscoll's intro to Beauvais' email says, Acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Beauvais asked that we send the below email out to you. Thanks for your continued commitment to our mission. I continue to be humbled by the incredible work you do every day to keep the American people safe, and I'm honored to serve alongside you, which I thought was a nice touch. Stay safe, Brian Driscoll, Acting Director. So here's the email that Driscoll had to forward from Beauvais to his people. Colleagues, I write with additional information regarding the memo I sent out to the FBI's acting director on January 31st. Multiple times during the week of January 27th, I asked the FBI's acting leadership to identify the core team in D.C. responsible for the investigations relating to events of January 6th. The purpose of the request was to permit the Justice Department to conduct a review of those particular agents' conduct pursuant to President Trump's executive order concerning weaponization in the prior administration. FBI acting leadership, Driscoll and Kassane, refused to comply. That insubordination necessitated, among other things, the directive in my January 31st, 2025 memo to identify all agents assigned to investigations relating to January 6th. In light of acting leadership's refusal to comply with the narrower request, the written directive was intended to obtain a complete data set that the Justice Department can reliably pare down to the core team that will be the focus of the weaponization review pursuant to the executive order. The memo stated unambiguously, and I stand by these words, that the information requested was intended to, quote, commence a review process, unquote, that will be used to, quote, determine whether any additional personnel actions are necessary, unquote. Let me be clear, no FBI employee who simply followed orders and carried out their duties in an ethical manner with respect to January 6th investigations is at risk of termination or other penalties. The only individuals who should be concerned about the process initiated by my January 31st memo are those who acted with corrupt or partisan intent, who blatantly defied orders from department leadership, or who exercised discretion in weaponizing the FBI. There is no honor in the ongoing efforts to distort that simple truth or protect culpable actors from scrutiny on these issues, which have politicized the Bureau, harmed its credibility, and distracted the public from the excellent work being done every day. If you have witnessed such behavior, I encourage you to report it through appropriate channels. In closing, I'm extremely grateful for the service and sacrifices of those at the FBI's ranks who have done the right thing for the right reasons. You will be empowered to do justice as we work together to make America safe again. I'm very much looking forward to continuing to work with you. So I think like 5 times he's bashed Driscoll in this email. I came in on January 27th and asked for all the names. You wouldn't give them to me. That's why I put out that memo. Your insubordination is why we're conducting this review.
Right.
It's just like, and then he goes to Driscoll and has Driscoll, who he's calling out for insubordination, send this information to the rest of the FBI.
Which was such a misfire because all he's doing is adding to the growing legend of the Drizz. Right? It's such an honor to be accused of insubordination by a political loser like Emil Beauvais. So a couple things I got to point out here. Despite the fact that he throws this out there as some way to kind of like ease people's fears about his original data call message, let's remember that message, the subject line was termination. So the data call is what it is, Emil. There's no hiding it. There's no like.
No, we were just opening a review process to make sure everybody wasn't corrupt. But termination.
And then, right. And so then he says here, the only individuals who should be concerned about the process are those who acted with corrupt or partisan intent. Okay, so what does that mean? I don't know what that means. If you voted Democrat or if you don't like the fact that the Capitol was attacked, and how are you going to prove someone's partisan intent other than taking this massive list of, now we know, over 5,000 individuals, employees of the FBI, and subjecting it to some sort of review against what their statements on social media, their political affiliation, or maybe donations to political groups that are disfavored now, and then this other thing. people who blatantly defied orders from department leadership. There are no people in the field in the FBI who are, first of all, getting direct orders from the Department of Justice. They follow the orders of their supervisors in the field. They don't even listen to headquarters at the FBI. I mean, the idea that that there's this band of diehard leftist partisans in the FBI field who are out there showing the finger to department leadership and targeting Republicans for political reasons is absurd. This is a fever dream of people like Emile Beauvais and our current president. What happens is they get assigned to work cases that are lawfully predicated, or maybe, let's say, to execute a search warrant or an arrest warrant that's been signed by a federal judge. It didn't come out of the progressive wing of the FBI, which does not exist. It comes from a federal judge. So these are people who just did their jobs and are now being subjected to this level of scrutiny. And give me one more minute here to finish this rant, and I'm going to give us a brief history lesson. This is something that I've been talking about with some of my former colleagues who are also retired now. It so fits the story of, I'll probably mess up his name, Martin Niemöller, who was a Lutheran pastor in Germany in the 20s and 30s, sympathized with kind of Nazi ideas and supported right-wing political movements. But after Hitler came to power, really started to question Hitler's focusing on the Protestant church. And he wrote this infamous poem. It says, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I'm not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me." That is what's happening today in the FBI and larger in the federal government. Make no mistake, this is an effort to cleanse the government of people who might harbor some questions, concerns, disagreements with Donald Trump. That's what this is. And this first cull of 5,000 in the FBI, if this goes through to any significant degree, will greatly impact and degrade the FBI's ability to protect the American people and uphold the Constitution.
Yeah, agreed.
All right, so moving on a little bit, in an exclusive story from Hugo Lowell at The Guardian, the U.S. Justice Department fired more than a dozen prosecutors who worked on the criminal cases against Donald Trump hours after the president directly ordered it from the Oval Office, according to two people familiar with the intervention. The move to purge people who worked for former special counsel Jack Smith had ostensibly come from the acting attorney general, James McHenry, who sent the formal termination notices that said they could not be trusted to implement Trump's agenda. But the genesis for the firings was Trump himself.
Yes, and in any other universe, that would be a massive, massive story. I mean, you remember with all of the dancing around of him trying to fire Mueller and not doing it, and that ended up being part of the obstruction case that was laid out.
How about the Bush administration, who fired a couple of U.S. attorneys because they didn't find them to be politically aligned enough with the administration? It turned into a total disaster. Those people all got their jobs back or recovered massive settlements through the legal system, and it's a black mark on the Bush administration to this day.
Yeah. Yeah, and also lots of Department of Justice lawyers were asking for the agency to put, the deferred resignation program, the fork in the road email. Now they're calling it DERP, the Deferred Employee Resignation Program.
Rhymes with burp. Yeah, I like it.
DERP. So a lot of DOJ lawyers were like, can you put this in writing that I won't be riffed in the next 8 months, or that the lack of possible appropriations on March 14th when the continuing resolution runs out won't impact me? Can I get this in writing? We're lawyers. Hi, can we get this in writing? And it says they actually made one, a contract.
DERP?
Yeah, a DERP contract. And it says, among other things, in number 5, that the employee agrees that the employee's effective resignation date and separation from federal service shall be September 30th, 2025. Employee, however, may resign from the federal service on any date prior to that if you want. The agency shall not take steps to terminate the employee's employment from the federal service prior to that date, except where the employee is convicted of a felony that would render the employees ineligible for federal employment. So I thought it was kind of funny that they said that being a convicted felon is a problem if you're going to work for the government.
Unless you're one particular employee.
Right.
But other than that, it's a problem. Problem for everyone except one guy.
And then they actually sent this to lawyers, which I find hilarious. Hey, if you sign this, you forever waive and will not pursue through any judicial, administrative, or other process any action against the agency that's based on, arising from, or related to the employee's employment at the agency or the deferred resignation offer, including any and all claims that were or could have been brought concerning said matters. Employee unconditionally releases the agency and its present and former employees, officers, agents, representatives, and all persons acting by, through, or in concert with any of those individuals, either in their official or individual capacities, from any and all liability based on, arising from, or relating to the matters that employee may have against them, including any and all claims that were or could have been brought. Consistent with applicable law, employees similarly waives any claim that could be brought on employees' behalf by another entity, including the employee's labor union. So basically what that says to me is, hey, it's illegal to fire you. So if you take this resignation, you can't ever sue us, ever, or anyone related, or anybody who knows us, or anybody who even has a name that sounds like us. You can't.
Yeah. If you slip and fall on the agency steps on your way out the door on your last day, you cannot sue us for failing to scrape the ice off the ground. It's pretty broad, and it's hard to tell like how much this buyout offer is appealing to people or not. I hear, from different things from my former colleagues that basically people who are retirement eligible are considering it pretty closely because they think, well, I can retire and then, basically get paid for another 8 months, and then I still get my full retirement on the date of retirement. But one of the things that's hanging people up is in responding to the infamous email, the payoff email. If you decide to take it, you check a box that basically says you have resigned/retired. And a lot of people don't want to ever on paper, legally in writing, indicate that they're resigning, right? It's like,
right.
It's a legally significant term to use, but it's also, I think, emotionally resonant to people who worked an entire career someplace with the goal of retiring duly and lawfully, having completed their service, kind of end of watch sort of approach. And so a lot of people are just kind of repulsed by that implication and not doing it for that reason. So we'll see what the numbers bear out, but so far it's pretty hotly contested in the workplace.
Yeah. Yeah. And there have been a couple of lawsuits we're going to go back to the FBI for a second about the agents who worked on January 6 cases, been a couple of lawsuits about not releasing the list of names. And we do have some orders that have come out from federal judges on that matter, and an agreement that was reached with the Department of Justice, good old Emil Beauvais over there, between him and these FBI agents associations and individual FBI agents, two lawsuits. And we'll talk about that. But we do have to take a quick break first. So everybody stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Okay, let's talk about the lawsuits that hit the docket regarding the list of FBI agents that worked on January 6 cases. From Cheney and Gerstein at Politico, they say 2 sets of FBI agents who worked on cases stemming from the January 6 attack on the Capitol, as well as the criminal investigations of President Donald Trump, have filed lawsuits to block Justice Department leadership from assembling lists of agents that they say will be used as part of a retaliation campaign.
Yes, they go on to say that the agents who brought the federal suits anonymously say they're fearful that the Justice Department leadership intends to publicly identify them and make them targets of threats and harassment. One suit, brought by the FBI Agents Association, points to calls by Proud Boy leader Enrique Tarrio to punish an FBI agent involved in his seditious conspiracy prosecution related to January 6th. Quote, "This bell cannot be unrung, and once the plaintiff's personal information is released, it will be eternally available on social media." That's from the attorneys for the unnamed agents in the suit.
The second suit, filed by the Center for Employment Justice, included screenshots of a 3-page survey they say DOJ leadership intends to use to identify thousands of agents who worked on the politically sensitive cases. Quote, plaintiffs legitimately fear that the information being compiled will be accessed by persons who are not authorized to have access to it, they argue. Plaintiffs further assert that even if they are not targeted for termination, they may face other retaliatory acts such as demotion, denial of job opportunities, or denial of promotions in the future.
Yes, and the suits were filed in federal court in Washington, D.C. Tuesday, around the same time as a deadline that the Justice Department had set for the FBI to identify all the personnel. And that's what we're talking about with the Driscoll emails. It's unclear what DOJ officials plan to do with the names, but some prosecutors and FBI leaders deemed untrustworthy by Trump appointees have already been fired.
That's right. And Marcy Wheeler, who is absolutely one of the best and most detailed DOJ watchers out there, you can see her stuff at emptywheel.net. Marcy points out that the first lawsuit represents 9 Jane and John Doe FBI personnel. It fashions itself as a class action and demands a jury trial. It's been assigned to Biden appointee Gia Cobb. It also makes claims under the First Amendment, Fifth Amendment, and Fifth Amendment privacy, and the Privacy Act. It provides these details about how much the government spends to obtain the expertise of FBI agents. It says FBI agents are chosen through a highly selective process and are carefully screened for aptitude and trustworthiness. Again, this is Marcy quoting the actual lawsuit. The suit goes on to say, FBI agents go through more than 4 months of intensive training at the FBI Academy before beginning their duties and attend numerous training sessions throughout their careers to adapt to new technologies and emerging threats. Many FBI agents are multilingual and routinely interface with intelligence agencies from allied nations. The training FBI agents receive is comprehensive and in some instances extremely expensive. On information and belief, plaintiffs assert that each agent of the FBI receives more than $3 million worth of training in a 20-year career. FBI agents also develop scientific expertise from their assignments and field duties, much of which cannot be replicated solely by training.
Yeah, and that was something we were kind of looking for. Like, well, how much, if you're firing 6,000 people with an average 10-year career at $1.5 million, I mean, it gets into the high billions of dollars of just wasted training and
you're
talent.
Just throwing it out the window.
And another actual email that Brian Driscoll sent out was about the 8 top FBI officials that were fired, and he just listed their years of service. He just listed their names and their years of service. Just want to let you know these are the people who were let go.
Right.
The second lawsuit from FBI agents represents 7 Jane and John Doe FBI personnel and the FBI Agents Association, which represents most active duty agents. It was initially assigned to Trump-appointed Judge Tim Kelly, but was reassigned to Judge Cobb, probably in a consolidation thing.
Yep.
Mark Zaid, highly experienced lawyer in this field, is leading that suit. The FBIAA, that's the Agents Association, makes 2 claims under the Privacy Act, a First Amendment claim, 2 due process claims, and this mandamus claim. This is from the lawsuit. The provisions of 28 U.S. Code Section 1361 provide a statutory basis for jurisdiction in cases seeking relief in the nature of mandamus against federal officers, employees, and agencies, and they provide for an independent cause of action in the absence of any other available remedies. Defendants' actions, as set forth above, constitute unlawful, intimidating, and threatening behavior toward plaintiffs in response to plaintiffs' lawful actions of executing lawful search and arrest warrants and participating in lawful investigations of crimes committed by January 6 perpetrators. Defendants do not have discretion to redefine the truth of January 6th, nor do defendants have any discretion to recast the lawful actions taken by the FBI and the previous leaders within the Department of Justice as illegal, let alone any discretion to retaliate and disclose names. Defendants have no discretion when it comes to ensuring the safety of the American people from extremist violence, let alone the safety of their own employees. If no other remedy is available through which the unlawful termination orders may be rescinded, then the plaintiffs are entitled to relief in the nature of mandamus, compelling defendants to recognize plaintiff to rescind the unlawful termination orders.
Yeah. And Adam Klossfeld pointed out on Blue Sky that the DOJ is arguing that emergency injunctive relief is improper because the FBI agents have failed to show irreparable harm. Ed Martin writes, plaintiffs' alleged harm is based on a series of speculative future events. Indeed, the central premise of plaintiff speculation is that someone, somewhere, at some time, may leak the compiled list. Putting aside that the list will contain no names, just identification numbers, see supra, the speculation runs contrary to the well-established presumption of regularity in government operations. I mean, I can't even read that with a straight face.
Well, right.
The regularity. Are we there still? We're in regular operation now?
Didn't we just go over a Judge Cannon order to prevent the Volume 2 from going to Congress on the speculation that they would leak it to everybody?
Good point. Oh, wait, sorry. Okay. So this again is Ed Martin writing for the Department of Justice. Plaintiffs can point to nothing that suggests the government intends to make public the list in this case. Wow. To the contrary, the department and the FBI management have repeatedly stressed the purpose of the list is to conduct an internal review, not expose dedicated special agents to public insult or ridicule. Now, let's remember that the original data call made it clear that the list would eventually be passed on to the White House.
Yeah. And, Donald Trump never releases names of his enemies.
No, he doesn't talk publicly very often.
He's not known for that at all. I mean, pretty much every single gag order that was slapped on him had that kind of evidence there. But all right. So then Judge Cobb urged the parties to come to a settlement agreement. And they did. And here is that order. With the consent of the parties, the court defers ruling on the plaintiff's motion for temporary restraining orders and orders as follows. Number one, the government will not disseminate the list at issue in these consolidated cases and any subsequent versions of that list, including any record pairing the unique identifiers to the list of names to the public. So not only can you not release the names, you can't even release the key. Directly or indirectly before the court rules on the plaintiff's anticipated motions for a preliminary injunction. So they're going to file for a more permanent injunction. But for now, they've agreed to this. Absent further order from the court, the government may terminate the proscription set forth in paragraph 1 at its election by providing 2 business days notice to the parties and the court of its intent to terminate. So if they want to release the list of names or the key, they have to give a 48-hour notice.
Right. That just gives the plaintiffs enough time to run back into court and pursue a more permanent injunction. Exactly.
The following schedule shall govern the plaintiff's anticipated motions for a preliminary injunction. Plaintiffs shall file their motions on or before February 24th, a couple weeks from now. Defendants will file their opposition by March 14th, and the plaintiff should file any replies on or before March 21st. And then she set the hearing for this anticipated preliminary injunction for March 27th. And this is interesting. Klasfeld draws attention to this important point. He says on Blue Sky, this court order binds the Trump administration government-wide, a point that the Department of Justice's lawyer resisted at the hearing until our good friend Norm Eisen and his team extracted that concession. So that's why this is government-wide, because of the quick thinking of one Ambassador Norm Eisen. So thank you.
Nice piece of lawyering by our boy Norm.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we have a lot more to get to, including a flurry of really weird, messed up memoranda, from our newly minted Attorney General Pamela Bondi. And we'll get to that right after this quick break. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hey, everybody, welcome back. So this past week, on February 4th, Pam Bondi was sworn in as the Attorney General after the Senate confirmed her in a 54-46 vote. Who's that one Democrat? It was John Fetterman. He voted to confirm Pam Bondi. Now, the next day, she issued a tranche of memos, 14 in all, I think. And I thought we'd go over a few of them because they outline a pretty clear direction that this Justice Department is going. And that's the point of this show, is to keep an eye on the Justice Department. And here's what's up.
Heck yeah, it is.
Mm-hmm. So let's start with the return to full-time in-person work at the Department of Justice memo. Basically says everyone has to return to full-time in-person work by Monday, February 24th, 2025. As federal employees, we are held to the highest standards, and maintaining a clear distinction between our professional duties and personal lives is essential to maintaining public trust. Well, what they're doing is they're bringing everybody on remote and telework back into crowded offices to entice them to just quit. Is what it is.
Essentially, yeah. The next memo is entitled Restoring the Integrity and Credibility of the Department of Justice.
Oh, God, this one. Oh.
Yeah. Yes, it's awesome. It includes the following. The Department of Justice must take immediate and overdue steps to restore integrity and credibility with the public. These steps are required because, as President Trump pointed out following his second inauguration, quote, the prior administration and allies throughout the country engaged in an unprecedented third world weaponization of prosecutorial power to upend the democratic process. That's pretty remarkable that an attorney general is making this claim officially on a document from the Department of Justice that they have been engaged in third world weaponization. Okay, anyway.
Right. It's almost like she doesn't care about the department at all, or giving it a giant fat black eye. You know?
Exactly. It's like an admission in some weird way. Okay. She goes on to say, the reconciliation and restoration of the Department of Justice's core values can only be accomplished through review and accountability.
Punishment and termination is what that means.
The punishment will continue until morale improves. Okay, I hereby establish the Weaponization Working Group, which will conduct a review of the activities of all departments and agencies exercising civil or criminal enforcement authority of the United States over the last 4 years, in consultation with the heads of such departments and agencies and consistent with applicable law, to identify instances where a department's or agency's conduct appears to have been designed to achieve political objectives or other improper aims, rather than pursuing justice or legitimate governmental objectives.
Yeah, she goes on, but I have to jump in here and be like, all of these investigations were opened properly and lawfully, and were, the search warrants were signed by judges, like you said, and it went through really rigorous due process on behalf of
1,000 people pled guilty.
Of the criminal defendant.
Of the 1,600, 1,000 pled guilty, and several hundred of the others were convicted by juries of their peers.
Yeah. So there's absolutely zero evidence in any court or anywhere by this massive, the thing that makes justice grind slow, this due process for criminal defendants' rights, that no judge ever, including all the Trump-appointed judges, were like, these were wrongful investigations. Right. Everything must be thrown out, blah, blah, blah. That never happened.
Not a single allegation of misconduct on the part of FBI agents or prosecutors assigned to these cases during the totality of the largest investigation ever conducted by the FBI. Not one allegation of misconduct that we're aware of so far. So, and the other thing that really concerns me here is the way she phrases this. There is not a trace, even a reference to what is the standard by which you are going to determine that a department or agency's conduct appears to have been designed to achieve political objectives. So I guess we're now creating the new appears-like standard.
Right.
So if there's one piece of it, if one person moves forward, raises their hand to say, I think these people were political, that's enough because now they've created the appearance.
Yeah, no. And it's also kind of bizarre that they're like, we are going to get rid of politicization and weaponization by feelings and appearances of what we think is political. Like, that's the opposite. Now, she goes on to talk about what the Weaponization Working Group is going to look at. The first thing is weaponization by Special Counsel Jack Smith and his staff, who spent more than $50 million targeting Trump, and the prosecutors and law enforcement personnel who participated in the unprecedented raid on President Trump's home. What? Okay. The one where we didn't wear our jackets and called you first and didn't go into locked closets, and that one? Okay.
And came in with a warrant signed by a federal judge?
Oh, okay. Wow. Federal judge, judge. Federal cooperation with the weaponization by the Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg, New York Attorney General Letitia James, their respective staffs, and other New York officials that targeted President Trump and his family and his businesses. the pursuit of improper investigative tactics and unethical prosecutions relating to the events at or near the Capitol on January 6th. Again, not a single judge said any of this was unethical.
No.
As distinct from good faith actions by federal employees simply following orders from superiors, which diverted resources from combating violent and serious crime, because apparently the 140 police officers attacked at the Capitol was not a violent or serious crime. And thus were pursued at the expense of the safety of the residents of the District of Columbia. Wow. The January 23rd, 2023 memo, in which the FBI suggested that certain Catholic religious practices were affiliated with violent extremism and criminal activity. Criminal prosecutions under the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act for nonviolent protest activity, and the retaliatory targeting and in some instances criminal prosecution of legitimate whistleblowers. I wonder if she's talking about like Alexander Smirnov there. But so basically, all of the, January 6th investigations, we're going to look at that for weaponization. And if we feel like it's got the appearance of being political, you're in trouble. We're also that, the Merrick Garland initiative about the Catholic churches that the Republicans in Congress had a field day with, which was nothing. It was just protecting families from violent people. But they want to protect those violent people. Pam Bondi, she wants to protect the people who block access to abortion clinics violently. And she wants to, protect these quote unquote legitimate whistleblowers, which is probably like the Twitter people and the first one that came to my mind was Smirnov.
To me, what comes to mind, and this goes out to all you Seinfeld reference people, this is Festivus.
Yes.
This is the annual festival of the airing of the grievances, as described by George's father. I mean, that's what this list is. These are the things we're still mad about, or really the things that the president is still mad about, and so we're gonna go after them. The next memo reinstated the use of the death penalty. And then she issued a separate memo entitled Restoring a Measure of Justice to the Families of Victims of Commuted Murderers. It goes on to say, former President Biden's death sentence commutations undermined our justice system and subverted the rule of law. The commutations also robbed the victims' families of the justice promised and fought hard to achieve by the Justice Department. The Department of Justice is directed to immediately commence the following actions to achieve justice for the victims' families of the 37 commuted murderers. DOJ will provide a public forum for the victims' families to express how the commutations impacted them personally. U.S. attorneys will pursue the death penalty in the 37 cases, and the Bureau of Prisons will ensure that they're locked up extra tight.
Yeah, I paraphrased that.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just so confused by all of this.
This is just propaganda. They're going to, like how they used Lake and Riley, or how, that's all this is.
But how do you send U.S. attorneys out to pursue the death penalty against someone who's received a presidential commutation? I don't get it. I mean, like, I don't know.
It's an exercise in futility. It's a propaganda exercise. That's all.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Next is the Sanctuary Jurisdiction Directives memo, so sanctuary cities. Mm-hmm. And this ends funding to state and local jurisdictions that unlawfully interfere with federal law enforcement operations. It identifies and evaluates all funding agreements with non-governmental organizations that provide support to illegal aliens, so any NGOs that give blankets to asylum seekers. You could be targeted. Pursues enforcement actions against jurisdictions that facilitate violations of federal immigration law or impede lawful federal immigration operations. And I think that we'll see some anti-commandeering lawsuits come out of this, but we'll see.
Yeah, you're going to see a ton of legal action on this one. I think it's already, underway. They sued Chicago this week for basically these sorts of violations. So you're going to see a lot of this fought out, I think, in court. Next is the Eliminating Internal Discriminatory Practices memo. And it says, by March 15th, 2025, each department component shall submit a report to the Office of the Attorney General, confirming the termination to the maximum extent allowed by law of all DEI, DEIA, and environmental justice programs, offices, and positions, including but not limited to Chief Diversity Officer or similar positions, all equity action plans, equity actions, initiatives, or programs, and all equity-related grants or contracts, and all DEI or DEIA performance requirements for employees, contractors, suppliers, vendors, or grantees. It goes on to say, identifying agency or department DEI or DEIA or environmental justice positions, committees, programs, services, activities, budgets, and expenditures in existence on November 4th, 2024, and providing an assessment of whether these positions, committees, programs, services, activities, budgets, and expenditures have been misleadingly relabeled in an attempt to preserve their pre-November 4th, 2024 function. Identifying federal contractors, suppliers, vendors, and grantees who have provided DEI training or DEI training materials to agency or department employees since January 20th, 2021. And finally, identifying federal grantees who receive federal funding to provide or advance DEI, DEIA, or environmental justice programs, services, or activities.
So does that mean Jeffrey Clark is fired? Wasn't he an environmental lawyer? Call us when there's an oil spill? I don't know.
He was, although I would guess he was not really on the side of environmental justice. He seems like he might have been more inclined for environmental injustice, but I don't know. I'm speculating there.
Yeah. And then there was also an ending illegal DEI and DEIA discrimination and preferences. And this is where her civil rights background comes in, right? Protecting white people. By March 1st, 2025, consistent with Executive Order 14173, the Civil Rights Division and the Office of Legal Policy shall jointly submit a report to the Associate Attorney General containing recommendations for enforcing federal civil rights laws and taking other appropriate measures to encourage the private sector to end illegal discrimination and preferences, including policies related to DEI and DEIA. This is the one where she says she's going to go after. The Department of Justice is going to go after private businesses that have DEI and DEIA, calling it illegal discrimination against white people or able-bodied people or, somebody not members of protected classes. Department of Justice will work with the Department of Education to issue directions. The Civil Rights Division will pursue actions regarding the measures and practices required to comply with the Students for Fair Admissions decision by the Supreme Court. That's the one that ended affirmative action. So she's going to go after schools as well.
I guess no one told her the Department of Education is on the chopping block, but okay. Don't get hung up on that detail. The next one is the general policy regarding charging, plea negotiations, and sentencing. Section 1 is charging decisions, focuses on those, and it's about how they must be based in law and not in politics or personal career motives, which Bondi accused the prior administration of doing. Now, part 2 is about plea bargaining, and it says, plea bargaining and plea agreements are governed by the same fundamental considerations that apply to step 2 of charging decisions. There is no room for plea bargaining for political animus or other hostility. Okay. Prosecutors may not use criminal charges to exert leverage to induce a guilty plea. I put a pin in that for a second.
Yeah, that's my big one. That's my cut. I feel like that's what a plea bargaining is for.
Yeah. That's how plea bargaining works. I mean, you can't charge people with things they didn't do. You can't charge people with cases that you can't make just to paint them into a corner and force them to plea bargain. But there's always a range of things that you could charge people for. So if the facts are there and the law is there, typically prosecutors charge people at the higher end that they can sustain, trying to create some room for bargaining beneath that. That's how plea bargaining works. And plea bargaining resolves something like 90% of the criminal cases that are brought nationwide at the federal and state level. Okay, so let's see. Nor may a prosecutor abandon pending charges to achieve a plea bargain that is inconsistent with the prosecutor's assessment of the seriousness of the defendant's conduct at the time the charges were filed. For example, it's helpful she provides an example because that sentence makes no sense. For example, absent significant mitigating or intervening circumstances, it will rarely be appropriate for a prosecutor to seek racketeering or terrorism charges at the outset of a case, but abandon those charges in connection with a plea deal. Now, I've been around a fair number of these cases, especially both terrorism and racketeering offenses.
I just felt pointed like at you.
Yeah, it's pretty much been my entire career, starting out as an organized crime investigator and then spending pretty much the second half of my career doing terrorism. This is not something that happens. Like, people don't, both RICO cases, which are the racketeering cases, and terrorism cases, you can't even charge them in the field until you send the charging document and the whole prosecution memo to DOJ. And they do a relentlessly detailed review of it and your evidence. If they think there's any weakness in the case whatsoever, they say, decline. You cannot charge your case in this way, because they are so careful about protecting the laws that underpin those charges. They don't want someone to bring a weak case that prompts an appeal that could cut away at the authority in the statute. So she's literally creating a problem. She's setting up like a straw man here to knock it down. This is not a problem that exists, but that's my view.
Yeah, agreed. But now she goes, just weird, because again, that's how plea bargaining works. You use criminal charges to exert leverage to induce a guilty plea. I mean, that's how it goes.
Right. And that's been determined entirely lawful by the Supreme Court on appeal numerous times over the past 100 years. Of
course, because there have been tons of motions to throw out charges based on that.
That's right.
So Part 3 covers sentencing, and it's pretty straightforward. Go by the sentencing guidelines. Got it. But they want to rescind stuff like the crack cocaine memorandum about sentencing guidelines. They want to make them tougher, obviously. Things like that, things that the Biden administration didn't focus on or wanted to change the way we look at those sentencing guidelines. But the sentencing guidelines are the sentencing guidelines. So then the memo turns to investigative and charging priorities. And they start with immigration enforcement. They're basically throwing everybody into immigration enforcement these days. DOJ shall use all available criminal statutes to combat the flood of illegal immigration that took place over the last 4 years. It was down from under Trump. Federal law prohibits state and local actors from resisting, obstructing, and otherwise failing to comply with lawful immigration-related commands and requests. U.S. attorneys' offices and other litigating components of the department shall investigate incidents involving any such misconduct for potential prosecution, including for obstructing federal functions in violation of 18 U.S. Code 371 and violations of other statutes, such as 8 U.S. Code sections 1234 and 1373. She's basically authorizing the Department of Justice to investigate and prosecute local law enforcement who don't go along with their immigration orders. And again, that is prohibited by the anti-commandeering doctrine in the Constitution. So again, we're going to see a lot of litigation over that.
That's right. Okay, and then she moves on to human trafficking and smuggling. And she says, Joint Task Force Alpha, which was created in partnership with the Department of Homeland Security to enhance enforcement efforts against human smuggling and trafficking groups in Central and South America, will be elevated to the Office of the Attorney General, while still coordinating with the Criminal and National Security Divisions. Personnel from the Joint Task Force will, note that word, will, support investigations and prosecutions at U.S. attorneys' offices around the country and deploy to U.S. attorneys' offices on the southern border to focus resources in those critical districts. Now, the buried lead here is in a prior frenzy over immigration, or the problems with immigration, which we have in this country, largely because Congress has never done anything to change and update the immigration laws, but I digress. I think 2004, the FBI received authority under Title VIII, which is the immigration law. So that was the point at which elements of the Department of Justice, the FBI being one of them, received legal authority to enforce immigration laws. And since 2004, the FBI's official policy on that has been, no, thank you very much. We don't train our people to do that. We don't teach those laws, those offenses in our academy. It's not our expertise. It's not what we do. So there's actually an MOU between the FBI and DHS that makes it clear that DHS will continue to have primacy in that area. We're not going into it unless there's some kind of like massive security disaster or something. So this is a huge departure from what has been agency policy for many years. And it's already happening. If you look at any of the television coverage of these raids, you're going to see guys in DEA vests, and you will see for the first time people in FBI tactical gear. And now I understand that they're they are trying to limit their involvement in this by saying, okay, we'll deploy with you, but we are there for security only, and leaving the immigration officers kind of in first place to actually do the interaction with the immigrants, ask them the sort of questions, to pursue whatever investigation they are under their own Title VIII authority. But this is really drawing everyone into the fight at a very tactical level, and it's because DHS is not capable of delivering on the number of detentions and returns of immigrants that have, they can't cash the check that has been written by the politicians regarding immigration.
Yeah. So they want everybody to get off the Joint Terrorism Task Force
That's
and
right.
come on down to U.S. attorneys' offices and border states to help.
That's right.
Which is huge.
Stop
departure.
what you're doing with crimes against children. Stop what you're doing to investigate fentanyl trafficking groups. Stop what you're doing to prevent an act of terrorism in the United States, which is the FBI's number one priority still, and really focus on this over here.
Yeah. And the other thing they're focusing on in this memo is transnational organized crime, cartels, gangs. So the Joint Task Force Vulcan, which was an initiative launched by Trump in 2019 to go after MS-13, which was wrongly deprioritized by prior department leadership and improperly allowed to languish, that's going to be reconstituted and expanded to address TDA in addition to MS-13. Those are two gangs, Venezuelan and otherwise. And that's also going to be elevated to the Office of the Attorney General. And then protecting law enforcement personnel. One of the Department of Justice's top priorities is protecting law enforcement at the federal, state, and local levels, except for January 6th, I guess. This includes aggressively investigating all too common instances of violence against and obstruction of law enforcement, seeking the death penalty for those who perpetrate capital crimes against law enforcement, and backing and promoting the efforts of law enforcement when they're subjected to unfair criticism or attack.
Next is shifting resources in the National Security Division to free resources to address more pressing priorities, i.e. immigration, and end risks of further weaponization and abuses of prosecutorial discretion. The Foreign Influence Task Force shall be disbanded. Recourse to criminal charges under the Foreign Agents Registration Act, FARA, and 18 U.S.C. 951 shall be limited to instances of alleged conduct similar to more traditional espionage by foreign government actors. With respect to FARA and 951, the Counterintelligence and Export Control Section, including the FARA unit, shall focus on civil enforcement, regulatory initiatives, and public guidance. The National Security Division's Corporate Enforcement Unit is also disbanded. Personnel assigned to the unit shall return to their previous posts. Note here, the Foreign Influence Task Force was designed to address the unlawful incursion of foreign governments and foreign actors into U.S. elections. It has nothing to do with the allegations of weaponization of DOJ and the FBI in last year's election. The weaponization thing, the complaint there is like, oh, it's not fair. They're treating Republicans unfairly. Well, this had nothing to do that. This is just simply enforcing the laws that are already in existence that say foreigners are not allowed to contribute money or anything else to domestic elections. But I guess we're not really concerned about enforcing those laws anymore.
No, and the FARA unit was set up pursuant to Robert Mueller's investigation, so it's automatically terrible in Trump's eyes.
Of course, yeah.
951, that was what Tom Barrack was charged with. So I can see where this is coming from. But man, to gut that and to make it just focus on civil enforcement is kind of like back in the day when they sort of just sued Manafort to register as a foreign agent, which is, what they do. I mean, the way that this works is, if you don't have obvious criminal charges to bring, you sue to get them to file.
Every FARA case starts with actually not even a lawsuit, a notification. The FARA unit notifies the person who they think might be overstepping the law and says, hey, we're concerned about what you're doing here. You should seek legal advice and stop doing it. And if they continue, then the lawsuit comes. And if it's something really blatant, then they consider criminal prosecution. But, Yeah, I mean, there's so much weird about this. In the first Trump administration, they made a big deal out of the fact that they had found that both the Iranians and the Chinese tried to interfere in the 2020 election. They had all kinds of big press conferences and things about it. So now I guess they're like, hey, you know what? We don't want that. We want to have a little bit more freedom of movement around interacting with foreigners in our elections, I guess.
Oh, that's exactly what it is. They're inviting foreign influence into our elections.
Yeah.
And then the last one is that we're going to cover is shifting alcohol, tobacco, firearm resources. And Bondi wants to free the resources to address more pressing priorities. So she's going to have the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives shift resources from its alcohol and tobacco programs to focus on matters like, federal firearms licensing and background checks. So again, it seems like they're just pulling all of these agents out to help work on mass deportation and immigration, which is against that, MOU that you said that's gone back for a long time now, that FBI is just not going to participate in any of this. But she's shifting all these DOJ resources to that, which she thinks is more important. So no, we're not going to look at foreign election interference that helps Republicans anymore. I'm sure they will if it's a Democrat or somebody that's against Trump, like Iran and China.
Yeah.
But I don't know. We need every single person that we can to do something that we've said that we're not going to do since the 70s, which is enforce the immigration rules.
Yeah. I mean, look, every new AG comes in with their own agenda, with their own focus on policy stuff, with their own ideas about how to execute the president's policies, right? You have to, as AG, you both enforce the law, but you also have some responsibility to follow the president's policy guidance as long as it's consistent with the law. And everybody does that a little bit differently. Fine. But along with those decisions, and this is the way she is laying out what her policies and priorities are. So along with all that, it's also totally fine and a good idea to understand what decisions this new attorney general has made, how she's thinking about her job and using resources, and then be smart. Think about, okay, so what are all these people being taken away from? What work is being left on the floor? So yeah, I'm not saying any of this is like illegal that she's making these decisions, but it is totally worthy to think, is this a good idea? And how is it going to affect the department and all of its agencies' ability to keep us safe?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're right. Every president, when Biden came in, he says, we're going to pursue these different things within the Department of Justice. We're not going to enforce immigration so much as we're going to figure out what happened on January 6th or, whatever your priorities are. And each attorney general does that. But what's really obvious here is that every single thing is directed at allowing whatever crimes Trump committed to continue while going after phantoms and taking resources away from actual threats.
Yeah.
That's what it seems like to me, a propaganda arm of the White House meant to go after people who harmed President Trump in some way, but that's in air quotes. But it's very weaponization-y.
Yeah, it's very narrow. It's like we're very focused on retaliation against people we believe are our political opponents and immigration. And we don't really care about most of the rest of the stuff that the department does.
Right.
So, yeah, we'll see how that works out. We're all going to find out.
Yep. All right. Believe it or not, we have one more story. This is a very long show, I know. So thanks for hanging in with us. But we have one more story about Kash Patel, who is set to become the director of the FBI. But we have to take a quick break. So stick around. We'll be right back.
Welcome back. Okay, one last breaking story from the Washington Post. They say Kash Patel, President Donald Trump's nominee to be FBI director, was paid $25,000 last year by a film company owned by a Russian national who also holds U.S. citizenship and has produced programs promoting deep state conspiracy theories and anti-Western views, which have been advanced by the Kremlin. according to a financial disclosure that Patel submitted as a part of his nomination process and other documents. Now, documents obtained by the Washington Post show that Patel received the money from Global Tree Pictures, a Los Angeles-based company run by Igor Lopatinok, a filmmaker whose previous projects include a pro-Russian influence campaign that received money from a fund created by Russian President Vladimir Putin. The payment to Patel came as he participated in a documentary that Lopatinok produced depicting Patel and other veterans of the first Trump administration as victims of a conspiracy that, quote, destroyed the lives of those who stood by Donald Trump in an attempt to remove the democratically elected president from office.
Wow.
I think the same financial disclosure also showed that Patel earned something like $2.5 million last year. So not sure that that's what destroyed the life looks like, but okay.
Yeah, I could, boy, destroy my life if that's how that happens.
Be careful what you wish for.
Well, I'll take $2.5 million. That's fine. No, okay. So this goes on to say, this story, that the 6-part series titled "All the President's Men: The Conspiracy Against Trump." Can you not even come up with your own title? Aired in November.
Weren't All the President's Men bad guys in the original All the President's Men?
Yeah.
Why would they call themselves that here? Okay,
well, why would Lev Parnas call his business Fraud Guarantee? We don't know.
Yeah, good point. Really good point.
So this whole series aired in November on Tucker Carlson's online network. And in one segment, Patel vowed to shut down the FBI headquarters building and open it up as a museum to the deep state, something he was pressed quite a few times on during his confirmation hearing, which he denied ever saying.
Right.
The details surrounding the payment to Patel, which have not previously been reported. Actually, they were reported by Mother Jones 5 hours prior, but I think the Washington Post missed that. They add to the questions that Democratic lawmakers and many veteran national security experts have raised about the nomination. So I really want to stop and pause here and say that, the Post put this story out, claimed credit for it, but David Korn over at Mother Jones is the one who actually broke this news for the first time hours before the Washington Post did. And that, kind of, I think the brain drain over at the Post is real. But other participants in this documentary series, Steve Bannon, Rudy Giuliani,
wow,
Mike Flynn.
There you go.
And the Post actually says Flynn resigned in 2017. He was fired. But okay.
Yes, he was.
Okay. So really, I wanted to make sure that we got the correct reporting, the first reporting that we got from Mother Jones. So, but still, regardless of who scooped this, what the hell, Andy? He's taking money from Kremlin-linked filmmakers. This reminds me of, you remember when Mnuchin Steve had to divest from his Rat Pack Dune movie studio, and he gave gave all of his shares to Blavatnik? Like, come on, you guys, be a little more creative with your money.
A little less crimey. Yeah. So, and can we at least acknowledge that it's weird? Okay. It's weird to participate in a documentary, a film that purports to be relating a true story, and to receive payment for that. You're not an actor in a documentary. I've contributed to a couple of documentaries. No one has ever offered to pay me a dime. I don't even get my parking covered. Because it's a documentary, for Christ's sake.
Yeah,
it's not,
I know. Oh, and something else really cool. This film company banks with VTB, which is a sanctioned entity since 2014.
Nice.
So we have a potential FBI director who has accepted money from Kremlin-linked people through a sanctioned bank. Like, come on, you guys. How can, there's got to be some other total jerk willing to, do your
launder the
bidding
dough
that isn't this compromised. Anyway.
Hey, that's what we've got.
That's what we've got. So we'll see that vote comes this week. It was actually postponed because of the information that they needed to get on Patel. And they still never got volume 2 of the Jack Smith report, which implicates Patel in a lot of things as well. So there's a lot of missing stuff, but that's the nature of this particular administration. So let's I know it's been a long show, but I want to take a listener question. If you have questions, there's a link in the show notes. Thank you for sticking with us today. I know it's been a long show. So what do we have today for questions, Andy?
So I picked one because it's, I thought, really well written, and also because it comes to, it raises an issue that is becoming more and more important as we get more of these lawsuits filed. So this comes to us from Helene, who says, "Hi, Allison and Andy. I've been a loyal listener for almost 2 years, and I'm very excited for the newly minted Unjustified podcast. I commend you both for your bravery, especially in these times, keeping us informed and breaking down what I predict will be many law-skirting actions coming out of DOJ and beyond. I have a very basic question. Given the horrifying actions coming from this administration in just the first few days, can Trump just come in and fire all federal judges, the law be damned? Given that many of his executive orders thus far can be deemed illegal other than mass outrage by the majority of Americans, the last line of defense seems to be the courts. But if the courts are bent to his will due to a mass consolidation, this, of course, goes away. P.S. I love the Lady Justice in the new artwork." Thank you, Helene, for that question. And I share your concerns about how prominent the courts will feature in weighing in on these very controversial, super aggressive executive orders and actions by the executive branch and actions by people like Elon Musk, who I don't even know what he is, special government employee now. So I guess technically part of the executive branch, but you know, that's another whole can of worms. To your question, no, I think that we have a lot to be concerned about, but I'm not sure that is makes the list, because federal judges are appointed for life. And the president doesn't have the ability to fire them. He can say they're fired, but I suspect they would just ignore it and they would continue to show up and continue to do their work. They get funded, through congressional actions, just like the rest of the government. I don't anticipate that would be interrupted. So yeah, and even if it happened and Congress went along with it and cut off their funding, it would immediately be challenged. And as crazy as this Supreme Court is, I cannot see them ever countenancing something along those lines. That's a full-on coup that would be an act by the administration of like essentially turning over 1/3 of the government. And I don't think it'll happen. And even if it did, I don't think it would last.
Right. I mean, he could try to do like what Netanyahu tried to do, gutting their judiciary over there. But, Trump has already taken steps to completely usurp the power of Congress by taking control of the purse strings. And from what I understand, even though there's a court order in place, there are still federal grants that have been frozen and remain frozen. And that brings me to my point. He doesn't have to fire all the judges. He just simply has to ignore court orders. And
that's entirely possible.
There's really no enforcement mechanism. Like the court will issue an order, like you can't freeze federal grants, and Trump will just say,
and they continue to be frozen.
Don't care.
Yeah.
That's my constitutional crisis. And that would be essentially the same as firing a bunch of federal judges, because you are then saying that the judiciary has no power. I have the power.
Right.
And that's what I'm looking for, is to see how these court orders will be enforced. Like the court order that just happened that says this kid, this Doge bag, whatever his name is, can't go in and have read-write access to the Treasury payment system or whatever. They've got a block on that now. Are they going to listen? Are they going to comply? And what happens if they don't? That's kind of what I'll be keeping my eye on.
Yeah, when the enforcement of federal court orders comes down in many situations, mostly to just your belief in the rule of law and your behaving or obeying the orders of federal court judges. And so if you're someone who has abandoned that and has no belief in the rule of law over you, then maybe you just ignore it. Like, it's hard to physically enforce anything on the president. Now, the same doesn't apply for the people around him. So let's say if one notable special government employee is the subject of a federal court order and that person ignores it, then that person can be theoretically held in contempt and treated accordingly
by the court.
Now, of course, you would rely on executive branch officers to enforce that contempt finding. But anyway, it's a complicated path, but and concerning. But I don't think you're going to see a mass firing of judges. But stay tuned and keep watching closely anyway.
Mm-hmm. And I don't want for a second anyone to think that I'm saying that don't bother going to the courts because who's going to enforce it? Absolutely bother. Go all the time, every day. Yes. Get your orders, get your restraining orders, get something to enforce. And then if those consequences happen or they're ignored, that is politically way more damning to this president. Make him go through those motions. Make him do this. I just want to bring that up. But as Elie Mystal wrote for The Atlantic this week, let's not rely on the courts to save us. Let's use them. They matter. But we have to see how this plays out. Will he even bother listening? He didn't bother giving a crap about the co-equal branch of Congress and their appropriations. He just impounded all that. And Russ Vought was just put in charge of Office of Management and Budget, who helped him impound the Ukraine aid that he was impeached over. So that's probably going to continue to happen. But we need to see what happens in our country when a president ignores or an administration ignores a court order. And I think we're headed there. Could be.
Right. Stay tuned and we'll tell you about it.
Yes, we will. And we'll try to do it in fewer than 90 minutes next week. But we'll see. We'll see what's in store. But thank you so much, everybody, for listening. Thanks for our patrons. You make this show possible. If you want to become a patron, you can do it at patreon.com/MuellerSheWrote. You get the episode early, usually, unless I'm out of the country. You get them ad-free, too, so you don't have to listen to the ads. And just incidentally, if you hear a weird ad, they've been doing this thing now where I block certain URLs and certain types of advertisement, but they create URLs that don't have anything to do with what they're selling to get around those blocks. So if you hear an ad you don't like, let us know. Send it to us, hello@MuellerSheWrote.com. Tell us when you heard it, where you heard it, and what the URL they're using is. And we'll continue to try to play our advertising whack-a-mole that we've gotten so good at. But we appreciate your time. And Andy, do you have any final thoughts today? I know it's been the first week was really, really difficult. I think we're finally seeing a little bit of pushback with the lawsuits and Driscoll. So I was just wondering what your thoughts were.
Yeah, it does seem like people are starting to get their feet back underneath them, which is good to see. We'll be looking for more of that. And stay tuned. Likely to be more craziness next week. And we'll be here to lay it out for you with respect to DOJ and everything related to it.
All right, everybody. See you next week. I'm Allison Gill.
And I'm Andy McCabe.
Unjustified is written and executive produced by Allison Gill, with additional research and analysis by Andrew McCabe. Sound design and editing is by Molly Hockey, with art and web design by Joel Reeder at Moxie Design Studios. The theme music for Unjustified is written and performed by Ben Folds, and the show is a proud member of the MSW Media Network, a collection of creator-owned independent podcasts dedicated to news, politics, and justice. For more information, please visit mswmedia.com.